Hello, and welcome to our Solicitors Qualifying Examination Mitigating Circumstances webinar. My name is Richard Williams and I'm a Policy Manager here at the Solicitors Regulation Authority. The purpose of today's webinar is really to talk about the SQE's Mitigating Circumstances policy and procedure, and in particular outline some of the practicalities and steps that candidates should take when they consider their performance in an SQE assessment has been affected by particular circumstances. This webinar is really timely as we've recently updated the Mitigating Circumstances policy following implementation of the SQE and taking into account insights and views from candidates who may well have been through the Mitigating Circumstances policy. As part of today's discussions, I'm sure you'll understand that we can't go into the details of individuals' decisions or particular circumstances, and we won't be able to discuss practicalities around booking the SQE. It's very much focused on the Mitigating Circumstances policy. So hopefully you'll be familiar with how our webinars work, but for those who may not be or new to our webinars, I'll just provide a very quick overview. So we really want this session to be as interactive as possible. We've already had a good number of questions submitted in advance, and we'll pick some of those up as we have a discussion today. But you can also submit live questions by clicking on the question link below this video. You can include your name with questions, but you also have the option to ask questions anonymously. We will try and answer your questions as we go through the webinar. The stream will be available on Catch Up, and so will the slides and links to relevant web pages on the resources for this event. So feel free to share with colleagues or anyone that you think might be well interested in mitigating circumstances. So before we delve into the discussion, let's introduce today's speakers. First of all, we have Jackie Panther. Jackie is Head of Equality and Quality at Kaplan, and her team is responsible for looking at and managing the mitigating circumstances claims. And Jackie works for Kaplan, who deliver the assessment on our behalf. We're also joined by Carol Cook, who's a policy manager here at the SRA, and Carol's role is really to make sure and oversee quality assurance of the SQE. So that's the introductions done. Let's crack on with the questions, and perhaps a really good place to start is with you, Carol. And can you sort of outline the underlying policy reasons behind the mitigating circumstances policy?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, of course. Good afternoon, everyone. I suppose the first point I'd like to make is really it's about being fair. Yeah, we recognise that, well, first of all, we want candidates to be able to perform to the best of their ability on the day. But we also recognise that things may happen which are unexpected, they're exceptional, and they're absolutely unpredicted and outside of the candidate's control. And these events could have an adverse impact on their performance. So we wanted to make a provision for candidates to be able to take the assessment again if those conditions or circumstances weren't present. So we call those circumstances mitigating circumstances. For anyone who's been through any form of assessment before or in a university, they might recognise the term extenuating circumstances, or in some cases they're called special considerations. So that was our starting point, really.
Okay, thanks for that, Carol. Just thinking a little bit about before someone takes the assessment, are there any measures in place to check with candidates when they take the exam that they are able to perform to the best of their ability?
Yes, we do. So again, something that some people may be familiar with. Before each assessment on every day, we ask candidates to really think about whether or not they are fit to sit the assessment. Are they in the best possible place to perform to the best of their ability? And we ask them to make a fit to sit declaration to that effect. We also ask them to declare that there isn't an event of which they are aware or there are no circumstances of which they are aware, for example, in relation to their health, which may cause them later on to make a mitigating circumstance application, because we would not usually consider a mitigating application from a candidate where the particular condition existed before the exam. If a candidate refuses to sign the declaration, then they are not allowed to sit the exam. They're not admitted to the exam room. So it's a fairly critical step for us and for candidates to make that, to do that self-check.
Okay, Jackie, coming over to you. So in the context of the SQE, can you share a little bit more insight and explain what mitigating circumstances are?
Yes, let me take you through it. So if we can have slide 1, this summarises or sets out what the provision of mitigating circumstances are within the mitigating circumstances policy, and this wording is also in the assessment regulations. So there are 2 elements to a mitigating circumstances claim for the SQE. The first element are the grounds. So the candidate can make a request for mitigating circumstances on one or more of these first 3 bullet points. So an issue could arise where there has been either a mistake or irregularity in the administration or conduct of the assessment. Something has arisen where perhaps there's a temperature issue, or there has been a technical issue in the assessment. So a mistake or irregularity. And or a candidate may feel that there has been evidence of bias in the conduct of the assessment. Or third, the candidate could, subject to the fit to sit policy, which Carol's just described, and the assessment regulations, a candidate could experience illness or other personal circumstances beyond their reasonable control. So the first part of the test is whether there has been an event, a mistake, bias, illness or personal circumstances, and it could be one or more of those 3 bullet points. The second part of the test is whether there has or likely to have been those events have or likely to have had a material and adverse impact on the candidate's mark or performance in the assessment. And this second element is significantly different than perhaps other organisations where candidates may have experienced mitigating circumstances claims in the past. For example, in UK higher education, where often extenuating circumstances policies or mitigating circumstances policies only have the first part of the test, which is an intervening event. So candidates should be mindful that there are 2 parts of the test, and they need to provide evidence of those 2 parts of the test. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Jackie. And actually, it's really good to see some questions coming in already. A lot of those questions are asking for sort of further examples of what a mitigating circumstance might well be. Jackie, have you got any kind of further insights to other examples?
Yes, of course. So example underground under bullet point 1 could be where there's been a technical issue with the computer desktop, which has perhaps led to a significant delay in the start of the exam. It is our objective that the exams start in a timely fashion, and if there has been an unexpected and unusual event where for technical reasons the assessment started later, then that would be a mistake or irregularity. I think bullet point 2, an example of biases, is by its very nature self-explanatory, and we have not had any instances of that, as we would expect. And then the third bullet point, illness. So if a candidate becomes unwell during an assessment, after signing the fit to sit declaration, then the candidate needs to notify the invigilator immediately or before leaving the test centre. Or perhaps candidates' personal circumstances, they've suffered a bereavement immediately before the assessment, and they hadn't appreciated the impact that bereavement had during the exam, and had signed the fit to sit policy.
Okay, thanks for that. Another question that has just come in which relates to I suppose the application of mitigating circumstances and timings of assessment. So the question is, what if a candidate must sit FLK1 and FLK2, and for those that are not familiar, that they are the assessments as part of SQE1, and mitigating circumstances during or after FLK1, so a candidate cannot sit FLK2. So what should a candidate do in that particular circumstance?
This is a great question for SQE1. There are different circumstances for SQE2, but for SQE1, this does arise. The assessments take place on separate days, and there are intervening days. Under the assessment regulations, a candidate must sit FLK1 and FLK2 together unless they've already passed one of the assessments, or they have a reasonable adjustment to split FLK1 and FLK2 to sit them in different assessment windows. So if a candidate is unwell and unable to attend FLK1 and FLK2, then under the assessment regulations, they should sit them subject to the fit to sit policy. They may submit a mitigating circumstances claim for the assessment that they are unable to attend. They must provide strong supporting evidence to explain the reason why there has been a mitigating circumstance. And the mitigating circumstances panel will decide whether those two limbs of the test have been satisfied, with reference to the assessment regulations that say that all candidates should sit FLK1 and FLK2 together. If the mitigating circumstances claim is rejected because there was insufficient evidence or the mitigating circumstances were rejected, then the assessment that they didn't attend would be marked as 0, and they will lose one of those 3 attempts, because they were required to attend both elements of SQE1 under the regulations.
Okay, thanks for that clarity, Jackie. So far we've talked a lot about examples of what might be a mitigating circumstance. Do you have any examples of what might not be a mitigating circumstance?
Yeah, sure. A range of examples, and I think from our experience over the last 18 months, this demonstrates perhaps a different experience of extenuating or mitigating circumstances, policies and regulations in other institutions, where candidates don't satisfy both parts of the test to show impact. So perhaps a complaint that the temperature in the room was uncomfortable, but the candidate unable to demonstrate the second limb of the test, which was that this did or is likely to have had a material impact on the marks or performance in the assessment. Or a candidate's view that the paper or the questions didn't mirror the sample questions or the training that they had in preparation for the assessment. Disagreement with a mark is not a mitigating circumstance. Transport issues is not a mitigating circumstance. Life issues impacting the preparation of the assessments. Now, this is important. If somebody has perhaps particular caring responsibilities that may have impacted preparation, that would not be a mitigating circumstance, because we're looking at a candidate's performance in the assessment. A candidate must be sitting if they are fit to do so, and they have signed the fit to sit declaration in the assessment.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. And we've talked a little bit about the process so far, Jackie, but I just wondered whether you could provide any more information on what a candidate should do if they want to make an application for a mitigating circumstance.
Yeah, perhaps we could have slide 2 up for a second. So first of all is read the mitigating circumstances policies. We have soon to be solicitors, so reading a relatively short policy should be part of their day-to-day preparation. The mitigating circumstances policy sets out the grounds and also sets out the policy. The process is really simple. It's completing a form. The mitigating circumstances form is in the candidate SQE portal, and the form can be reviewed on the website at any time. It needs to be accompanied by information in support. where relevant. So if a candidate is raising a mitigating circumstance about illness, then a medical note or a doctor's note confirming the illness or the circumstances.
Okay, and just for those that may not be familiar with the acronym CST, Jackie, what does that stand for?
Good spots, Richard. That's the Candidate Services Team. So
Excellent.
the information of how to contact the team is on the website. They can be contacted by email and also by telephone.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Jackie. Carol, a question coming up for you. So we've talked a little bit about the assessment regulations, and those regulations state that it's the assessment board that makes decisions on mitigating circumstances applications. Can you explain in a little bit more detail what's involved in making that decision?
Yeah, sure. The decision as to whether or not to grant a mitigating circumstances claim and discount an attempt rests solely with the assessment board. But there's quite a lot of process that goes on before that gets to enable the assessment board to make its decision. And the first thing that happens is a mitigating circumstances panel is convened. That representatives from the SRA and CAPLAN who are not involved with the incident or directly with the delivery of the assessment sit on that panel, and they receive the application, any supporting evidence, and the outcome of any investigation that's carried out. So for example, if a candidate claims that a particular event occurred in a particular centre, then that has to be investigated. So checks are made at the Pearson View centres. We get the reports made of the invigilators, so we can understand fully the nature and full extent, if you like, of the event upon which the candidate relies. And that's really important because that helps us understand, for example, what the extent of any delay was. For example, if the candidate's desktop happens to fail and they get moved to another desktop. It also helps us to understand the sort of remedial actions that happen immediately. So if a candidate loses some time, that time is reset within the assessment. That's possible. So the panel sees all of that, and based on that, it will make one of two recommendations to the assessment board. It will make a recommendation either to accept the application, the mitigating circumstances application, on the basis that the event occurred, the ground has been made, and there is evidence of impact, and that's supported by the evidence that the candidate provides with the application. Where that occurs, the assessment board will, if they accept the recommendation, they will discount the attempt, or the panel will recommend that the application is rejected because basically the ground is not made out, it's not supported by the evidence, or as Jackie mentioned, the candidate hasn't really explained how the second part of the test, if you like, hasn't been made out, the impact it had on them, the impact it had on their performance. So where there's a recommendation to reject, and if the board accepts it, then the attempt is counted. It's also probably worth knowing that applications which don't go to the assessment board for a decision are those where the candidate has actually passed the assessment. So if the candidate has passed the assessment but has made a mitigating circumstances application, the approach that is taken is that it would be very difficult for the candidate to evidence adverse impact on the grounds that they've met the standard.
Okay, thanks for that explanation, Carol. We've had a question coming regarding the circumstances by which, if a person becomes ill and is not fit to sit FLK2. What should they do, Jackie?
Well, the assessment regulations that govern the SQE require candidates sit FLK1 and FLK2 in the same assessment window. So if a candidate is ill, then they are not fit to sit and they are unable to sign the fit to sit policy. Their initial mark would be 0 and it would be counted as an attempt, but they should submit a mitigating circumstances claim, as we've been describing, under the third underground C, illness or personal circumstances. The candidate must provide independent supporting evidence demonstrating that they were not fit to sit the assessment, and the mitigating circumstances panel will consider the circumstances described in the mitigating circumstances claim form and in the evidence in support. As Carol described at the beginning, we want to make sure that this is fair to all candidates. The regulations say that everybody should sit FLK1 and FLK2 together, but if there has been an intervening event between the end of FLK1 and the beginning of FLK2, and a candidate is unwell and unable to sit FLK2, then provided that there is strong supporting evidence that confirms that the candidate was not fit to sit the assessment on the date of FLK2, then it's likely that the mitigating circumstances claim would be successful and the attempt would be discounted.
Okay, hopefully that answers that particular question. Thinking a little bit towards the future, we've got an SQE2 coming up relatively soon. So are there any specific points that you would like to highlight now which apply specifically to SQE2 in terms of mitigating circumstances? And perhaps, Carol, you could pick that question up.
Yeah, sure, Richard. I think the one point which probably I should have made a wee bit earlier, but didn't, but it's just as relevant here, is really to understand that the outcome of a mitigating circumstances application will either be to accept or reject and to discount an attempt from the 3 permissible attempts. What the assessment board will not do is adjust a mark. So the assessment board will not and cannot guess how a candidate might have performed if that particular event had not arisen. And so the fairest thing to do is to discount and give them another opportunity to do their best, if you like, when those circumstances aren't present. SQE2 is, maybe it's a wee bit different to other exams that candidates might be familiar with, in that although there are 16 individual assessment stations, there's a single pass mark, and no individual station has its own pass mark. So it's a single test of competence, the threshold of which is determined by a single pass mark. And there is no requirement to perform to a particular level or a particular standard in each of those individual stations. So it's compensatory in nature. You could do fairly, you could not be so good in one assessment, but actually you could compensate for that by performing really well in one of the other stations. And because of the way the SQE is constructed, without a single individual pass mark for each station, it's not possible to bank a mark, if you like, and then it's not possible to sort of disaggregate it. It's not possible to split the assessments and say, well, I did okay in all of those others, but this event actually occurred in the probate interviewing assessment, and all I have to do is to retake that. That's not possible with the way in which SQE2 is constructed. So, for example, there is always a delay, a gap, if you like, between the oral elements of SQE2 and the written elements of SQE2. The size of the gap will depend upon whether you're in the first sitting or the second sitting or the third sitting. And something may well happen between the oral assessments and the written assessments, but they are not capable of being split. There are not individual pass marks for the oral assessments and individual pass marks for the written assessments. So the important thing to do is, if an event occurs which you think did have an impact, falls within one of those grounds, and did or is likely to have had an impact on your performance, then for SQE2 you would make an MC application and evidence it in exactly the same way that you would for SQE1. And if it's successful, the outcome would be that you would be given, that the attempt would be discounted and you would be given another opportunity to sit SQE2.
Okay, thanks for that, Carol. Jackie, coming to you, if that's okay. Obviously, we've had a number of SQE sittings now since the introduction of the SQE. Is it possible for you to share some of the insights that you've picked up from the mitigating circumstances applications, and are there any key issues you'd like to share with anyone watching?
Absolutely. Perhaps we could have slide 5. First of all is read the key policies and the assessment regulations. The assessment regulations are not that long. It's input that they set out the governance of the SQE, whether it's mitigating circumstances or marks and fit to sit. So it's critical that candidates understand the framework which the assessments are governed by. Read the key policies, which in this instance would be mitigating circumstances and fit to sit. Don't wait until after the assessment. I think it's really important now for candidates to arm themselves with knowledge and information to understand, first of all, what the fit to sit policy is going to be, what the declaration is going to be that they are required to sign on the day of the assessment, so that on the day of the assessment they have in mind, if they're not feeling quite right or they may be feeling a little bit unwell, bear in mind what the fit to sit declaration is and review the mitigating circumstances policy, so that there's a general understanding of what those mitigating events would be and what would need to be demonstrated if a claim is made.
Okay,
is that okay?
That's incredibly helpful. Yeah. Kind of wrapping up now, because sort of conscious of time. A question for perhaps both you Carol, and Jackie. So, are there any takeaways that viewers can think about in terms of making a mitigating circumstance application in the future? What would you want people to leave this webinar with?
Am I going to pick this up first, and
then
yes, Carol,
I'll let you
can go first.
And then
yeah,
Carol, you
first,
can add anything in that I've forgotten to mention. As I've said, read the assessment regulations to understand what the governance is of the SQE. For the purposes of this, read the fit to sit policy and read the mitigating circumstances policy. Read the fit to sit policy on the day of the assessment. Candidates are going to be certifying that they have read the policy and they are signing the fit to sit declaration. Next is if there is a mitigating event that is likely to have had an impact on marks or performance at the test centre, candidates must report the issue. So, for example, if a candidate feels unwell or there's an external noise, candidates are reminded of that when they're undertaking the assessment, but it's part of the fit to sit declaration that they will report things as they arise, and certainly before they leave the test centre. That isn't the mitigating circumstances claim, that's to ensure that we have a contemporaneous record of what has happened if an incident's occurred. Then going back to Carol's point earlier on, mitigating circumstances cannot change a candidate mark, cannot change the pass mark. If the mitigating circumstances are accepted, then the outcome will be a discounted attempt. The next thing I would say is don't just have a go. Candidates need to be aware, going back to the fit to sit policy, mitigating circumstances will not normally be accepted for a pre-existing condition or a candidate's view that they didn't have any choice because of perhaps life circumstances or work circumstances. We're very, very sympathetic about the amount of work and preparation that's required for the SQE. So high stakes professional assessment. We only want people to take the assessments who are fit to do so. Candidates are signing the fit to sit declaration, and having signed the fit to sit declaration because they feel they have no choice to do so will undermine and probably result in a rejected mitigating circumstances claim after the event. Couple more points. Failure to describe impact in the claim form. There's two elements to the test. One, the event, the event which may have that's occurred, whether it's mistake, bias or illness or personal circumstances, but failing to describe the impact. Compared to UK universities at the moment, where there may only be a requirement to describe an event, this policy requires that there is an event and there has been or is likely to have been impact on marks or performance. Finally, independent written evidence, if it's relevant. These are all soon to be solicitors. Think about the evidence that you would need to build in a case. What evidence do you need? Independent evidence to support the mitigating circumstances claim that is being submitted. And if there is any doubt at all, ring the candidate services team that are available by telephone or by email, because the team wants to help candidates and advise them and give them information so that they're in the best position to assess either whether they should sit an assessment or what to do if an event has occurred and they're not quite sure about how to submit a claim.
Just a final question for me. Presumably all of the information around the assessment regulations and the mitigating circumstances policy itself is available online for people to go and have a look at after this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's come to the end of the webinar. So hopefully you've found that useful and got a lot more clarity and understanding on the application and navigating the mitigating circumstances policy. So thank you to Carol, thank you to Jackie for that insightful information. Hopefully we've answered all of the questions that have come through. However, if we haven't managed to answer a particular question you've raised, we'll look through them all and see if there's anything else we can cover in our future webinar on communications. So on that note, we really want to hear what you thought of this webinar and today's event. Was it useful? Was it what you expected? Did you get what you thought you were going to get out of it? And what type of content would you like to see covered in the future? So there should be an evaluation link below this video stream, and if you click on that, you can let us know what you think. It only takes 2 minutes to complete, and it will really help us improve. So if you are planning on watching this later to recap on some of the information that's been discussed, you can do. It will be available on our YouTube channel. So all that leaves me to do is really say thank you for taking the time to share with us your time, and hopefully you've got a much better understanding of the mitigating circumstances policy, and goodbye, and please do complete the evaluation.